NPR just published a piece today that truly has some of my favorite topics to talk about. It's got royals, it has phone hacking, it has Rebecca Brooks, it has Murdoch, it has US media, it's got it all. These are a few of my favorite things. It all comes together because of one man, Will Lewis, who has been tapped to lead the Washington Post as their CEO starting in January 2024. He's accused of being a part of the 2011-2012 Murdoch tabloid hacking cover-up. On my TikTok and YouTube, I have a playlist dedicated to Rebecca Brooks, and it goes into much of this time period. It's helpful additional information. While I will summarize a little bit of this article, and we'll talk about some additional context as well, I do recommend that you go to NPR, check out this piece, or give the 4-minute audio version a listen. It's important to note that while Will Lewis is not named as a defendant in the cases that Prince Harry and Hugh Grant have against News Corp, which again was started by Rupert Murdoch, their lawyers do accuse him of, quote, helping to lead a massive cover-up of criminal activity when he was acting outside public view, end quote. This is for his time at News Corp. Briefly, this is Will Lewis. He's got a long career you can look up, but some highlights include business editor of Murdoch's Sunday Times. He was also at their rival, the Daily Telegraph, becoming their youngest editor. After the Daily Telegraph, he goes back to News Corp, this time as an aide to the aforementioned Brooks, the new head of News UK. Lewis was appointed as, quote, one of just 2 executive members of a new management and standards committee to ensure evidence was preserved and new policies were put in place, end quote, for News of the World. The jokes just write themselves. I can't speak on Will Lewis's entire journalistic career, but it does seem like sometime around 2010, when he joins News Corp, he becomes more of a corporate fixer and less of a journalist. And this next part actually reminds me a little bit of GB News and their firing of Dan Wootton and Lawrence Fox. This is also where I think a good argument can be made about him being a fixer. So 2 months after Lewis leaves the Telegraph, it sends in 2 reporters undercover to speak with a key government official that is part of determining whether the Murdochs can acquire Sky, a major satellite TV conglomerate that Murdoch had his eye on. And a minister who was a liberal Democrat did tell the undercover reporters, I have declared war on Murdoch and I think we're going to win. This gets leaked in December of 2010 to the BBC, which the Telegraph didn't do because obviously they wanted to report the scoop first, so who beat them to it? There is not ironclad proof that it was Will Lewis, but, quote, the investigative firm Kroll concluded that Lewis arranged the leak to the BBC to help his new bosses by knocking out the officials seen as hostile to the takeover deal. End quote. This reminds me a bit of GB News and their firings of Wootton and Fox because it came at a time when they are interested in acquiring the Daily Telegraph. And those firings in large part are seen as a way to create the illusion that they are a respectable outlet that should have ownership of this conservative paper in the UK. It's an argument that Will Lewis was brought back for many reasons under the News UK umbrella in the corporation and not running or editing one of the papers. That's something that was probably on Rupert Murdoch's mind at the time of the phone hacking scandals, was how this would affect this potential TV deal and what they could do, similar to GB News, to put on the appearance of a respectful, cooperative, mature, ethical business. And a large part of that was shuttering News of the World, labeling it as the problem child, the work of one rogue reporter and an editor, Andy Coulson, who would take the fall and serve a couple months in jail. And this was also in an effort to protect The Sun, the sister tabloid that expanded after News of the World closed. One of the things that Grant and Harry's legal team cite in their case against News Corp is that in an email Lewis sent in early February 2011 to his IT chief, he relayed, quote, the green light from a top corporate lawyer to continue what he called the email migration process. The lawyers say this phrase was code for mass erasures, end quote. Because while News Corp has said that he was brought on to help them create better policies and prevent this from happening again, a lot of people are skeptical of that and see it more as an effort to bring someone in who can help cover up the crimes. And this is all alleged to include mass deletion of emails, hiding of Rebecca Brooks's computers to access more information. Remember, she had criminal charges brought against her and she was found not guilty on all charges. And also the allegation of paying off police. Because it's worth noting, here's Rebecca Brooks in 2003 admitting to paying police.
Can I not just ask whether they ever pay the police?
Sorry?
It's just the one element of whether you ever pay the police for information.
Yeah.
We have paid the police for information in the past, and it's been...
And will you do it in the future?
Depends on.
We operate within the code and within the law, and if there's a clear public interest, then within the same holds for private detectives, for subterfuge, for video bags, whatever you want to talk about.
It's illegal for police officers to receive payments.
No, we don't. I just said within the law.
It's worth noting that the famous Levinson inquiry into press ethics, which included testimony from Will Lewis, actually led to a report that the committee produced for recommended changes, press regulations, which conservative minister David Cameron decided was no longer needed, thanks but no thanks, which effectively shuttered Levinson 2, which was going to look into police involvement with journalists in these criminal activities. This is particularly worth noting because when News UK's chief spokesperson was asked about this for the NPR story, they pointed to a December 2015 decision by prosecutors not to file criminal charges against the company. Quote, at the time, the Crown Prosecution Service said there's no evidence to suggest that email deletion was undertaken in order to pervert the course of justice, end quote. Which, sure, but this doesn't really carry a lot of weight if potentially the police were colluding with journalists. And none of this is particularly new. Byline Investigates reported on this back in June of 2020. This is hypothesized to be one of the reasons that Will Lewis lost out on the BBC top job. So my question that I wanted to pose to a reporter is, why would the Washington Post bring on Will Lewis? What is the impetus for that decision? And luckily, I know a fabulous one, News by Hillary. She is on Instagram and TikTok, and she spoke with me about this move. She pointed out that Will Lewis has deep political and media connections. Media circles in London are quite small. He is someone who would have influence across the board. Also brought up the great point that Washington Post is struggling. There is supposed to be a round of redundancies coming up, as well as lagging subscription sales. Whether you agree with his tactics or not, Will Lewis has overseen major companies like News Corp when they went through enormous change. The other point Hillary brought up, which is worth noting, is that Will Lewis helped start News Movement. He created this in 2021, and it was designed to unpack current events for a Gen Z audience. It's a great idea, but despite having millions in funding, they only have 45,000 Instagram followers. Some of their most recent reels also have a very low view count, which is surprising given the number of followers they have. It does lead me to question whether their follower growth was organic or not, but it's something I would have to dive more into. There was also this digital venture he tried to launch while at the Telegraph. Great Guardian article on this, you should read into it. I don't know if there's a real record of success in reaching these younger audiences in a digital media landscape, but it would make sense, as Hillary said, that with lagging subscriptions, a 2024 election coming up, that someone like Jeff Bezos would be looking into other ways to reach larger audiences, especially younger audiences who primarily get their news online. That perhaps Lewis was seen as the kind of forward thinker to take on the job. What does this mean for the overall feel of the Washington Post, the journalism that they produce? Remember, this is the paper where Watergate was broken. That still remains to be seen.